Welcome to the latest edition of the BRSN Insider, Safe at Home edition, here with Josh Pound and head coach Mark Blaise of the men's lacrosse program. Coach, obviously your program, one of the programs that was hardest hit by the pandemic and the social distancing, the stay-at-home orders, but you're able to get about a third of your schedule in. Just talk us through how things had progressed. Were you guys happy with the start of the season, or looking back at it now, are there things that you would have liked to have seen maybe the team improve on up to the point where you were sitting before everything was canceled?
Yeah, well, the way that I coach and the way that we do things and preach things in our program, we're all about April. Last year we didn't lose in April, and that was going to be kind of a tenet of us moving forward and, trying to win our conference every year, because that puts us in a great place for the national tournament. But this year, with how many great teams we scheduled early on for our national non-conference schedule, we really kind of left some things out on the table, unfortunately. A close game against Kaiser down in Florida on the second day of a back-to-back, we win that game where they finished as the number 2 team in the country. And then obviously losing to Indiana Tech, one of the last games of the season, was, a game that we kind of just let it get away from us. And, what's really sad for us is that we had some identity crisis in between there, where we were trying to find out who we were and how to adjust to kind of a new core, especially on offense. And we'd really found that identity and really kind of gotten all on the same page. And that's what is kind of the most disappointing is, you go through some of that turmoil and some of that, that fire trying to make iron sharp. And then you're kind of getting to the point where that iron's starting to get sharp. And then, right when we're ready to kind of really get to work, the season gets pulled out from underneath us. So that's unfortunate.
Well, things kind of went rather quickly. We're on a Friday. We go from suspended. So there was a glimmer that maybe we might have an opportunity to get back on the field. And then obviously by that next Monday afternoon, the NEI kind of made the decision for all of their conferences and all their membership by canceling the spring seasons. Just take us back through, that 24, 48-hour period for you and your team.
Yeah, well, we're really fortunate that we were all together on spring break when most of that news was hitting. I kept joking that, no news broke until I was in the driver's seat of the Raven bus. And so it was really frustrating, have guys basically being my personal assistant, either on Twitter, on my phone, calling different coaches, calling members of the athletic department, trying to figure out what's going on, just so that I can give them the correct news of the day and try to keep them informed. But after that, it was really just kind of that wait and see. We had, had some games canceled that Friday. But for basically the next 2 weeks, we had games get canceled. And so kind of balancing the act of keeping the guys sharp and ready to go, but also managing their expectations, because really on Friday, we kind of saw the writing on the wall. At least I did, just because, lacrosse is such a NCAA heavy sport, really dominated by the Division II, Division III. And so NAI is just kind of a newer for lacrosse. And so once I saw the NCAA schools start to cancel, I really kind of knew that it probably wasn't gonna happen, that something that NAI was gonna come down and say. And so kind of managing those expectations for the guys, so they weren't kind of too blindsided by everything.
So the decision comes down, season gets canceled. We get an extra week of spring break before the decision then is also made to move to distance learning. So everybody kind of scatters across the country. How long did you give the guys to get settled in before you kind of said, okay, we need to start kind of regrouping and staying on task? Or was it something that you literally every step of the process through that first week, and then as class got started, that you were with them and talking with them on a day-to-day basis? Or how did you take that approach?
Yeah, so like I said, we were lucky because we were still on campus. And so because we were on campus, we could kind of have some of those meetings in person. And so we were able to meet on that Friday and meet. And then also we met once the decision came down that it was done and the guys could go home. We kind of had one last meeting, and then I kind of gave them some time and I was sending out, tips and different things from my background as an education professional that I know of. And so kind of giving them some tips on online learning. And then we touch base quite often. And then I also just kind of jump in on the way that we do study halls. We do it in small groups. And so there's groups of 5. And so my guys are still meeting either on Zoom or FaceTime. And so typically I just kind of pop in and just kind of say, how are you guys doing? So that's kind of nice because everybody I think knows now, when you're on a Zoom that's more than maybe 6 people, it can become kind of pointless, or at least you just don't feel like you're talking to anyone. You just kind of feel like you're talking to yourself. And so it's nice for me to not only, talk to them one-on-one, but also be able to talk to them in like small groups. And then, we have also been doing, we're really lucky. Danny, our trainer, she's been doing some rehab stuff on Monday nights. So I join in on that when I can. And then, with the pass fail and things like that, some of the more complicated things, we'll jump on and do a full team meeting where it's maybe a little bit more me just giving them information and asking questions.
And you feel like, in the time that you've had conversations and maybe those smaller groups, everybody's settling in, everybody's making the adjustments the way they need to?
Yeah. I mean, we have a good group of guys where, they're willing to roll with the punches. And, with lacrosse, it's, a game of momentum. And so most of my guys are pretty used to things going back and forth. And, you might have a bad day where your internet is terrible or your little brother is being really annoying in the corner. But, the next day, that you got to get to it and grind. Most of my guys are coming back and saying, that they have so much time that they're able to do really well on their classes. And, that is one bright spot is academically, removing that lacrosse burden. A lot of guys should be getting a lot of really good GPAs.
Well, so we've talked about, what the season was like, the transition away from being together. Obviously, you got a group of seniors this year that probably left not really, feeling like they had fulfilled maybe what they came to Benedictine to accomplish. The NEI comes down, after kind of the dust settled, and it did grant blanket everybody, actually all spring sports athletes, and another 2 semesters of eligibility. But, as time, as things happen, it's a great thing, but it's not necessarily just as black and white as here's 2 semesters, now come back. Guys have plans, things happen, people are going to graduate, and obviously they're there to get an education. We've talked, through email, through texting or whatever, none of your seniors are coming back. So just talk a little bit about, what it means for you to have had those guys in your program and help you kind of reestablish your footing here as the head of the Benedictine men's lacrosse program.
Yeah. Well, first off, I do feel like, a lot of times people say, oh, well, hey, your kids have another year of eligibility. And I'm like, man, you don't understand small school athletics, because to ask my guys to come back when, some of them have already accepted jobs, already gotten into grad school, put that all on hold to come spend, $20,000 or more just to play their 5th year, it's not feasible. And so I really sat down with a lot of my guys, maybe even the ones that were maybe on the fence, and kind of talked with them on, what are the pros and cons, what do you have lined up, et cetera. We're lucky that 2 of our guys we're already planning on being on campus next semester. And so one of them is Tyler Santini is really going to benefit from that extra year of eligibility because he's going to be here for his engineering. So he's going to be playing next year. So I'm not going to scoff at returning a 2-time first team. Awesome. But, those other guys, Peter Gerard, Cam Shoney, Trevor Swoboda, Grant Mallett, Steele, Moran, those are guys that really came in, and they were really the first full recruiting class under the last tenure of the previous head coach. And so they're really kind of the guys that set the foundation for, what does it look like for a lacrosse player at Benedictine? And so just hard work, a bunch of guys that could do a lot of different things, people that switch positions throughout the course of their tenure, and just really laid it all out there for our program. And we're huge pieces of last year's team that went to the national tournament. And, obviously, unfortunately, they didn't get the chance to really put their mark as the senior class of this program, kind of pushing us forward. And that's unfortunate. But, like I've said, is that, the messages that are going to carry on through our juniors and freshmen, juniors through freshmen, is what the real lasting impact is. It's not just about, what's their final record, or, like Peter Girard is the all-time points leader and goals leader. It's not about, adding one more to that. For them, it's really about just kind of that, not having that last time to be a family on the field, which is really the most unfortunate part about it.
Now, one thing that, we usually sit down, we talk, under normal circumstances where we spend most of our time talking about the previous game and what's coming up next. And one thing that we now have the opportunity to kind of take a look at is get to know you as a coach, get to know you as a person a little bit more than maybe people might be aware of. Talking with you before we got on here. So Midwest, born and raised, picked up lacrosse later in life. And then now you're making a career out of being a collegiate lacrosse head coach. Just that's not exactly a normal sport here in the middle part of the country. It's starting to grow, obviously, by leaps and bounds every year. But just take us through how you discovered lacrosse, and then how you became passionate about being involved in the sport.
Yeah. Well, I was a pretty typical Midwest kid. I played, especially for my generation, kind of hyper, got into every competitive sport, AAA baseball, playing, premier soccer, all that stuff. And, by the time I got to high school, I was burnt out, and I was really tired of playing sports that my dad knew anything about. And so I started running cross country because my dad didn't run, and my parents basically were like, you got to play two sports. And one of my best friends at the time was going to go play lacrosse. And I was like, sure, I don't want to run track. And so I literally showed up. I had no inkling of what it was. One of my really good childhood friends, he's a year older than me, went and played Division I at Bellarmine. So, I knew a little bit from that. So once I had decided to play, him and his family was able to kind of help me out a little bit, and kind of transition. Really at St. Thomas Aquinas High School, it's really nice where it's a lot like Benedictine, where there's really high expectations. If you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And so that first year kind of hit the ground running. And then, sophomore, junior, and senior year were pretty fun playing varsity. And then, the real big difference from today versus, 10 years ago when I was deciding on where to go to college is that there was no college programs to play at. And so kind of segueing into how I got into coaching, when I showed up at Benedictine, I know that President Bennett said something to me and some other people that had a lacrosse background that basically said, you should start the club team. And so my junior year, things started getting rolling. And through that, I was able to really kind of fall in love with coaching, and actually kind of switched. I had thought I was going to be a teacher, and then kind of switched to being a lawyer or a history major, and getting that coaching bug really pushed me to be like, this is what I want to do. I want to teach. I want to coach. And so, kind of the rest is history. I've been around lacrosse coaching since then. And I really just kind of got addicted to it. And I was coaching way too much at one point. I was coaching, JV varsity high school, and then also a full college schedule at Rockhurst University. And then, coaching in the summer. So yeah, does that answer all your questions?
Yeah, no, you're fine. So still young in your head coaching career at the college level. So what are some things that, how's the game? I talked to Amanda, obviously the women's game has changed leaps and bounds, even from when she was playing. What have been some of the biggest differences you think that you've seen, some of the better changes, the things that maybe not such a good change in the sport as it's continued to grow in popularity? Your experience is Midwestern, but you've had some experience there with Lacrosse or Rockhurst, seeing some other schools from outside of the region. Just take us back through maybe how you've seen the game grow, change since when you finally kind of first came on the scene as a coach and collegiately.
Yeah. Well, some of the biggest changes for us, it's kind of like I would say for the women's game, a lot of the changes have been rule changes. Some of the biggest changes for the men's game has been technology. And so as things have gone where, making sticks more durable, skinnier, smaller, basically makes it harder for the ball to come out. As we when I was in high school, there was no rules. You could have the skinniest stick, and it was impossible. I mean, you could run through 8 guys, and unless somebody decleated you, you were going to keep the ball. And so the game's kind of changed from an ISO one-on-one type gameplay to nowadays it's a lot harder to do that. And so it's a lot more about offensive movement. It's a lot more about creating opportunities. I would say that it's mirrored a lot of kind of the way we've gone with basketball, where, in the middle 2000s, it's a lot of isolation and, 1v1, mid-range game. And now it's really gotten to the point where, coaches really, it's something that we preach a lot. It's either we're hitting dunks or we're hitting time and room, 10-yard shots. And those are your best shots that you can get on a lacrosse field. And so I would say that that's a huge change. And just for me personally, you kind of talk about me being a young head coach. So this is my 3rd year here. This year was my first year ever coaching a team that was established, that had success. At Rockhurst, we were always building. When I got to St. Thomas Aquinas High School, our program was like 25 kids. And then by the time I left, it was like 50. And so I was always kind of in build mode, and that was kind of the way I was wired. And so this year was pretty interesting on not exactly being on build mode, kind of being on fine tune, and continued success mode. So that was pretty interesting.
And obviously men's lacrosse, it's a physical game. I mean, it's like, if to the untrained eye, it can be a little interesting to watch. Just talk a little bit about, what it takes to, I mean, we've seen guys transition from being on the football team in the first few years to kind of being a guy that can come. Now we've kind of got a program that's established. From a recruiting standpoint, do you feel like you can finally go out and bring in lacrosse guys, or are you still kind of looking for a mix of a guy who's spent a lot of time playing lacrosse and a guy who is just a natural athlete that can transition and become a lacrosse player in college?
Yeah. So I typically recruit, I always kind of say, we're trying to have 15 guys. And I always kind of say that we are recruiting 5 guys that I would consider finished products, guys that are going to come in. I already know what they are. How do we push them forward to that All-American status? Somebody like Peter Girard and Trevor Svoboda, Brady Guck, those type of kids. But then, we're recruiting. For me, I think if I just recruited 10 kids that were all just the same lacrosse level, I don't think that I'm going to get a lot of upside out of that. I kind of know what I'm going to be getting. And so I typically recruit 5 kids that I would deem athletic, kids that maybe started playing, their freshman year of high school or the sophomore year of high school, that aren't as fine-tuned, but they're athletically really gifted. Somebody like Curtis Wesley, who comes in, and maybe his first year is going to play defensive midi for us. And then as we kind of develop him, he's going to then turn into someone that's more of an offensive player. And then typically sometimes, we'll end up recruiting, 5 kids that are good lacrosse players, but maybe they're a little bit undersized. Maybe we need to put some weight on them. Maybe they're not fast enough. We need to get them in the weight room with Coach Kendall. And so we're definitely not at the stage anymore where, if you've never played before, you could play. That's definitely not the case anymore. But, for me, as my coaching philosophy, I personally think that you can I think I'm a good enough coach that I can coach anybody to figure it out. Will Schmitz for us was in the seminary 2 years ago and never played lacrosse before. And, this year he was going to be a pretty big contributor on the defensive midi side of the ball. And, really was developing into really good D-mid. And, I always tell recruits when they're on campus, if you can figure out the kid that's only been playing for 12 months, I will be very impressed, because you cannot tell. He's a solid player.
Well, the final thing I think, we'd like to touch on as we get to kind of know you as a coach a little bit more. Who are some coaches maybe, over your time, not necessarily lacrosse coaches that you've had, but just coaches in general that you've kind of pulled different philosophies from, different things. You know, a lot of different sports can translate coaching philosophy wise, or you know, the way you handle your team, the way that you build a culture, just some things that maybe that you're using to kind of, you know, you're not the founder of the men's lacrosse program, but you're, you know, the one that's been asked to kind of come in and just revamp things and kind of keep us moving in a positive direction. So you know, year 3 now, you've kind of had that established footing. Guys have bought in. What kinds of things have you learned about and used to get guys like to buy into this is me, this is my program now, and this is how we're going to do things?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it started at a young age. You know, I didn't have great coaches. You know, I had some coaches who took things really seriously when I was a kid, and it kind of took the fun out of it. And then when I was in 5th grade through 8th grade, I was really blessed. I had the best football coaches ever. Chuck Brandenburg and Paul Taylor were like the nicest. I mean, they really just taught me how to have fun while also being serious. And so, you know, that's one of the big things for me that I've always kind of fallen back on, is that, you know, excellence is something that I expect. I have high expectations for all of my guys, but I'm still a big relationship-based coach. And I definitely feel like I got started with that. You know, and then when I got into high school, you know, I was really blessed. Like I said, I went to a great high school where there was a ton of good coaches. That's where I taught for 3 years. And so I would definitely say Justin Wrigley coached me across country. He's got a dynasty in the state of Kansas. I think he's won like 20 state championships in 15 years. And then, you know, also the basketball coaches, I've kind of said basketball and lacrosse have a lot of crossover. And so Rick Hetzel taught me a lot. You know, something that we do is something called CPR. It's cut, pick, replace. And, you know, I stole that directly from him. And, you know, he taught me a lot about, you know, one of his favorite things he said to me was, it's not always about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and Joes. And that taught me a lot, especially when you get frustrated, maybe you're early on as a coach and you're like, I want to do this X's and O's. But at the end of the day, you know, if you're not developing the Jimmies and Joes and you're not getting them to buy in, it doesn't matter what you know. And so a lot of that kind of falls back on my background as a teacher, where it's, you know, big teaching thing, as they always say, you know, no one's going to care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's always stuck with me a lot. And so, you know, I don't put labels on things, you know, I don't say family. We don't break it down with family or anything like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, my guys know that I have their back and I expect them to have each other's back. And it's really not just about lacrosse for us. It's about, you know, walking through the stretching line and talking to the guys about what's going on in the world, or making a stupid pop culture reference just to show them that I'm still hip, or I'm kind of turning into a dad already or something. And so, you know, especially this year, you know, I kind of had to reach out to some people because I was in that new situation where I had never been here before. And, you know, I had always been like, drive. This is where we're going. This is where we're going. I've never been at the situation where I'm like, okay, we're really fine tuning at this point. And so that was a big change for me. And so, you know, like Ryan Moody and a lot of the other coaches, you know, me and Paul and Eric and Amanda, Coach Wilcox and the football staff's always been super supportive of us too. And so it's really nice to have, you know, you and I have conversations and things like that are really what helped me kind of push things forward, and kind of always look for those blind spots on, you know, what are we not doing as a program, you know, lacrosse wise, but also, you know, team building, and how do we make our team more cohesive and stuff like that.
All right. Well, that is very insightful. Good to have you. You know, it's glad to be able to sit down, and it sucks that we can't do it in person. You know, we're not sitting in the studio, but you know, there's a quote out there that it's for a PG-13 audience that I won't use right now, that I'm sure you could probably think of if I led it in the right direction. But I do appreciate you taking the time and to sit down with me today. And even though we can't physically sit in the same room together, it is nice to have a conversation, get to know you a little bit more, you know, and how you're building the program, and, you know, different circumstances this year. I think like I told Amanda, we might be getting ready for the semifinals, I think, of the KCAC tournament tomorrow or today. I don't really, I've gotten to the point in my schedule where I quit looking at my calendar updates, because it's just, it's partly
I took
depressing and partly frustrating.
I took the calendar updates off mine because I was like, I don't need to be reminded that we were supposed to play Missouri Baptist today. I don't need that. So I completely agree. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks. Stay healthy, stay safe, and Lord willing, we'll be back together in the fall, and we get to get things going again here on the campus.
Sounds great.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.